The phone slipped from my hand, clattering against the marble floor of my boardroom. On the other end of the line, there was no voice, just the jagged, wet sound of someone struggling to breathe. Then, a boy's arrogant laugh echoed through the speaker, followed by the sickening thud of a body hitting pavement. Was my daughter taking her last breath while a monster held her phone? Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment on your city or country. My name is Victor. I spent 20 years operating in the deepest, darkest shadows of the Air Force. I did the jobs the government would never admit to, and I survived things that would break most men. When I finally walked away, I built a multi-billion-dollar aerospace empire from the ground up. I traded my tactical gear for tailored suits. I traded war for boardrooms. But in that agonizing fraction of a second, standing at the head of a massive mahogany table, all the money, power, and influence in the world meant absolutely nothing. The line went dead. The silence that followed was louder than any bomb I had ever heard. I did not say a single word to the dozen executives staring at me. I just turned and walked out. The heavy glass doors sealed behind me, cutting off their confused murmurs. By the time I reached my private elevator, my chest was tight, and my vision was narrowing into a dangerous, familiar tunnel. My heart was hammering a rhythm I had not felt since my days in a hostile drop zone. Violet, my only child. My wife passed away 5 years ago from a quiet, cruel illness, and Violet was the only piece of my soul that remained intact. She was the only light left in my dark, structured world. She was supposed to be safe at her prestigious, ivy-covered university. She was an art major who painted landscapes, rescued stray dogs, and saw the good in absolutely everyone. She did not have enemies. She did not run with a bad crowd. The drive to the campus was a blur of flashing streetlights and roaring engine noise. My knuckles were white, gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands went numb. I dialed her number over and over. Every single time, it went straight to voicemail. I listened to her cheerful, musical greeting on a loop, contrasting it with that wet, struggling breath I had heard on the live call. As I broke every speed limit on the highway, my mind kept replaying that boy's arrogant laugh. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated privilege. It was the sound of someone who believed they were utterly untouchable. Someone who felt entitled to destroy whatever they wanted. I swore to God if someone laid a hand on my little girl, I would tear their world apart piece by piece. I bypassed the campus entirely when my security team tracked her phone's last GPS ping. It led me straight to the county hospital's trauma center. I slammed my car into the emergency loading zone, ignoring the shouting security guard, and ran through the sliding glass doors. The harsh smell of bleach, iodine, and copper hit me like a physical blow. It was the smell of a combat medic's tent. It was the smell of blood. I grabbed the edge of the front desk. "Violet?" I demanded, my voice low, but carrying a frequency that made the receptionist physically flinch. "Where is Violet?" The nurse frantically typed on her keyboard, her eyes scanning the screen before she looked up at me. Her face was entirely drained of color, and her eyes filled with deep, hollow pity. That pity terrified me more than any weapon ever pointed at my chest. A doctor in blood-stained scrubs pushed through the swinging double doors of the intensive care unit. He looked exhausted, his shoulders heavy. He asked if I was the father. I could only nod, my throat suddenly too thick to speak. He led me down a long, blindingly white hallway. With every step we took, the billionaire CEO was stripped away. The civilized man died in that corridor, leaving only the father and a soldier. The doctor stopped outside room 4. He turned to me, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Victor, you need to brace yourself," he said softly. "She suffered massive blunt force trauma, broken ribs, a fractured orbital bone, and severe internal bleeding. And there are other injuries. The assault was severe. She is lucky to be alive." I pushed past him. Nothing could have prepared me for what was waiting on the other side of that door. My beautiful, vibrant daughter was hooked to a dozen machines, the rhythmic beeping the only proof that she was still in this world. Her face was swollen and bruised a dark, violent purple. Her left arm was encased in a heavy cast, and a thick, bloody bandage wrapped around her head. But it was not the physical injuries that broke me. She was awake, but she was not really there. She was staring blankly at the ceiling, her eyes empty, completely stripped of all the warmth and light she used to carry. I fell to my knees beside her bed. The cold linoleum bit into my skin as I gently took her bruised hand in mine. I kissed her knuckles, my tears falling silently onto her skin. She did not blink. She did not even look at me. The piece of her that made her Violet was gone, trapped in whatever nightmare she had just survived. Then, the door creaked open. Detective Adrian stepped into the room, his expression grim. In his hand, he held a clear plastic evidence bag. Inside was Violet's torn, blood-soaked jacket. "Sir," Adrian said, his voice hesitant, almost afraid to break the heavy silence. "We found her dumped in the alley behind the Delta fraternity house. But you need to know the reality of what we are dealing with here. The medical examiner found multiple DNA profiles." I stood up slowly, never letting go of Violet's hand. The coldness spreading through my veins was absolute. "How many?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. Adrian swallowed hard, gripping the evidence bag tighter. 40. There were 40 of them. I stared at Detective Adrian, the number echoing in the sterile silence of the hospital room. 40. My mind, trained for decades to process threat assessments and combat scenarios, snagged on the sheer impossibility of the word. 40 young men, 40 sons of privilege, 40 monsters who had looked at my only child and decided she was nothing more than prey. Adrian shifted uncomfortably under my gaze. He was a veteran cop, the kind who had seen the worst of human nature, but right now, he looked like a man standing on the edge of a minefield. "We have the scene locked down," Adrian said, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial murmur. "But you need to understand the landscape we're navigating, Victor. The Delta House isn't just a fraternity, it's a fortress funded by the wealthiest families on the eastern seaboard. Senators, tech moguls, hedge fund managers, their kids are the ones living behind those walls." I gently laid Violet's bruised hand back on the crisp, white hospital sheets. I pulled the blanket up, tucking it around her shoulders, a useless gesture of protection for a girl who had already been shattered. I turned away from her bed, so she wouldn't see the violence bleeding into my eyes. "I don't care if their fathers own the state," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I want names. I want an arrest warrant for every single one of them by morning." Adrian sighed heavily, running a hand over his exhausted face. "It's not that simple. We tried to breach the house an hour ago. We were met by a team of corporate lawyers before we even reached the front steps. They've locked the place down tighter than a drum. No one goes in, no one comes out. They are claiming diplomatic immunity for 2 of the international students, and invoking every legal loophole in the book for the rest. They've already scrubbed the security footage." A cold, familiar numbness washed over me. It was the same feeling I used to get right before a high-altitude drop behind enemy lines, the total suppression of panic, replaced by absolute, lethal clarity. The system was already closing ranks to protect its own. "Who is the ringleader?" I demanded, stepping closer to Adrian until he was forced to look me in the eye. "Tristan," Adrian said reluctantly. "Tristan Vance. His father owns half the real estate in this city, and funds the police pension program. He's the one who rented the private security detail currently blocking my officers from doing their jobs." I walked past Adrian, pushing through the swinging doors of the ICU. The hospital corridor felt suffocating. I needed air. I needed to think. I pulled out my phone and dialed Dominic, my lead corporate attorney. Dominic wasn't just a lawyer. He was a shark who navigated the treacherous waters of billionaire acquisitions. If anyone knew how to apply pressure to the Vance family, it was him. He answered on the second ring. "Victor, I saw the news alert about the campus lockdown. Is Violet okay?" "No," I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "She was attacked, Dominic, by 40 of them." Tristan Vance led the pack. There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. The silence was more damning than any apology. "Victor," Dominic finally said, his voice tight with warning, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do not do anything rash. I will have my team at the precinct in 10 minutes, but you are walking into a meat grinder. The Vance family has the district attorney in their pocket. They have judges on speed dial. They will drag this out for years, drag Violet's name through the mud, and destroy her credibility before it ever sees a courtroom." "I'm not looking for a courtroom, Dominic," I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. "I want everything you have on Tristan Vance, his schedules, his financial records, his security protocols, everything. And I want it by sunrise." I hung up before he could argue. As I walked out of the hospital into the biting night air, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. I answered it, expecting a reporter or another useless detective. Instead, a smooth, deeply arrogant voice slithered through the speaker. "Mr. Sterling," the voice said. It was the same voice I had heard laughing on Violet's phone right before the call dropped. It was Tristan. I stopped dead in my tracks. "You have a lot of nerve calling me." I just wanted to offer my condolences, Tristan said, his tone dripping with mock sympathy. It's a tragedy what happened to your daughter. The campus isn't safe these days, but I wouldn't go pointing fingers, Mr. Sterling. You know how these things go. Girls get confused. They drink too much. They make up stories. It would be a shame to see your company's stock plummet over a messy, public misunderstanding. He wasn't just threatening me. He was gloating. He was banking on the fact that I was just another corporate suit who would protect his bottom line over his flesh and blood. He had no idea who he was dealing with. He only knew the billionaire. He didn't know the soldier. Listen to me very carefully, Tristan, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. You and your little friends think you are untouchable because of your father's bank accounts. You think your lawyers can build a wall high enough to keep me out, but you don't know what I am capable of. Tristan chuckled, a sound that made my blood run cold. We'll see about that, old man. Expect a visit from the dean in the morning. I think you'll find the university is very interested in making this whole ugly situation disappear. The line went dead. I lowered the phone, staring out at the city skyline. The towering glass buildings suddenly looked like fragile glass houses. They thought they could bury my daughter's trauma under hush money and legal threats. They thought the rules applied to me. They were about to find out that when the law fails, the only justice left is the kind you make yourself. I did not sleep. The sunrise over the city looked like a sprawling, ugly bruise, painting the sky in sickly shades of purple and gray through the hospital window. I remained in the hard plastic chair beside Violet's bed, listening to the rhythmic, mechanical hiss of her ventilator. Every breath she took was a victory. Every breath she took was a reminder of what had been stolen from her. At exactly 7 o'clock in the morning, the heavy wooden door of the ICU room swung open. Dominic walked in first. My lead corporate attorney usually carried himself with the swagger of a man who owned whatever room he stepped into, but today, his shoulders were slumped. His eyes avoided the bed where my daughter lay. They are moving faster than we anticipated, Victor, Dominic said, his voice barely above a whisper. He handed me a thin manila folder. I tried to file the injunctions. I tried to get the arrest warrants pushed through the judge's desk at midnight, but the walls are already up. Before I could open the file, the door opened again. 2 men stepped into the sterile room, bringing the distinct, suffocating scent of expensive cologne and cheap morals. I recognized the first man immediately, Julian. He was the dean of the university, a man who built his entire career kissing the rings of Billionaire alumni. Beside him stood a taller, sharper-looking man with silver hair and a tailored suit that cost more than most people made in a year. Mr. Sterling, Julian began, his tone dripping with a carefully rehearsed, sickeningly gentle cadence. We are profoundly devastated by this unfortunate incident. The entire campus community is keeping Violet in our prayers. I did not stand up, I just looked at him. Get out of my daughter's room, Julian. You have exactly 5 seconds before I throw you through that glass window. Julian swallowed hard, taking a half step back, but the silver-haired man put a firm hand on the dean's shoulder, stopping him. I am Quentin, the district attorney, the man said, his voice perfectly level, completely unbothered by my threat. And I strongly advise you to listen to what we have to say, Victor, for Violet's sake. I slowly stood up. I was inches taller than Quentin, and I let the sheer physical proximity do the talking. Speak! Quentin did not flinch, but I saw the micro-expression of hesitation in his eyes. The police have concluded their preliminary investigation at the Delta Fraternity House. We have taken statements from all 40 young men present last night, including Tristan Vance. And? I demanded softly. And their stories match perfectly, Quentin replied, his gaze dropping to the floor for a fraction of a second before meeting mine again. They claim Violet arrived at the party uninvited. They claim she consumed a massive amount of alcohol and narcotics of her own volition. According to 40 sworn statements, the physical injuries were sustained when she stumbled and fell down a flight of concrete stairs near the alley. The absolute audacity of the lie hit me like a physical strike. She has defensive wounds on her arms. She has a fractured orbital bone. You don't get that from a fall. Forensics are subjective in a chaotic environment, Quentin countered smoothly, slipping fully into his courtroom persona. The medical examiner cannot conclusively prove those injuries were inflicted by another person. We have no security footage. We have no independent witnesses. We only have the word of 40 upstanding young men from the most prominent families in this state, against the word of a girl who currently cannot speak. So, You are dropping the charges, I stated. It wasn't a question. I am declining to prosecute due to a severe lack of conclusive evidence, Quentin corrected. If you try to push this to a trial, Victor, I promise you, their defense attorneys will tear Violet apart. They will put her mental health, her private life, and her reputation on public display. They will destroy her in front of a jury. Do you really want to put your traumatized daughter through a media circus just to lose? Dean Julian stepped forward, pulling a sealed white envelope from his inside pocket. He held it out to me with trembling fingers. Victor, the university wants to help her heal, Julian said, his voice pleading. The Vance family, along with the other parents, have anonymously pulled together a substantial fund, a $20 million endowment in Violet's name. We can facilitate a quiet transfer to any university in Europe. She can start fresh. All you have to do is sign a non-disclosure agreement and let this unfortunate misunderstanding fade away. I looked at the envelope. $20 million. That was the price tag they had placed on my daughter's soul. They had broken her, and now they were trying to buy the pieces. I looked at Dominic. My lawyer slowly shook his head, his face pale. He knew it was over. The law was not broken. It was functioning exactly as it was designed to. It was a shield for the rich and a weapon against everyone else. I was a billionaire, but Tristan's father and his 39 friends represented a $1 trillion syndicate that owned the very ground we stood on. I turned my attention back to Julian and Quentin. I didn't yell, I didn't curse. The boiling rage inside me suddenly went ice cold. Keep the envelope, Julian, I said, my voice so quiet it forced them to lean in to hear me. And Quentin, you can close your files. Relief washed over the dean's face. He actually smiled. I knew you were a reasonable man, Victor. This is the best path forward. Get out, I whispered. They didn't hesitate. They turned and practically fled the room, leaving the faint scent of their cologne hanging in the air. Dominic lingered by the door, looking at me with a mixture of sorrow and deep concern. Victor, Dominic started, I am so sorry. I can try civil court. We can sue them for damages. Go home, Dominic, never taking my eyes off Violet's battered face. Your part in this is done. Dominic hesitated, but he knew me well enough to recognize the finality in my tone. He nodded once and left, closing the heavy wooden door behind him with a soft click. I was finally alone with my daughter. The civilized world had just delivered its verdict. The law had stepped aside. I walked back to her bed and leaned down, pressing my forehead gently against her unbruised cheek. Her skin was so cold. I tried, sweetheart, I whispered into the quiet room. I tried to do it their way. I tried to be the man I promised your mother I would be. I stood up, pulling my phone from my pocket. I bypassed my normal contacts and opened a secure, encrypted application I had not touched in 15 years. I typed in a 12-digit alphanumeric sequence. The billionaire CEO was dead. He died the moment Quentin told me 40 men were going to walk free. I pressed dial, listening to the scrambled static of the secure line connecting. A gruff, familiar voice answered on the first ring. I need a ghost team, I said into the receiver, staring at the blank wall. I need full tactical surveillance on 40 targets in the city, and I need the armory unlocked. There was a brief pause on the other end. Consider it done, Commander. Who are we hunting? Everyone, I replied. I hung up the secure phone and pocketed it, the heavy silence of the ICU pressing in on me again. The rhythmic hiss of Violet's ventilator was a constant, agonizing metronome of her fragile state. I pulled the small, uncomfortable plastic chair closer to the bed and sat down. For a long time, I just watched the subtle rise and fall of her chest under the thin hospital blanket. I needed this image burned into my mind. I needed to remember exactly why I was crossing a line I had sworn to my late wife I would never cross again. I am so sorry, Violet. I whispered into the quiet room, my voice rough with unshed tears. I gently brushed a stray lock of hair away from the thick bandage wrapped around her head. I spent my whole life building walls to keep the monsters out. I thought money and power could protect you from the ugliness of this world, but I was wrong. The real monsters don't hide in the dark. They hide behind trust funds and legal teams. She didn't stir. Her face remained a swollen, purple mask of trauma. I took her small, cold hand in mine, feeling the delicate bones beneath her bruised skin. They think they won today, I continued, my voice hardening, the sorrow rapidly crystallizing into pure, icy resolve. They think they bought their way out of this. They think they can break you and just walk away because their fathers own the game, but they don't know the rules I play by. They don't know what kind of man they just woke up. I leaned in close, pressing my lips gently to her knuckles. I promise you, my sweet girl, when you wake up, you will never have to look over your shoulder again. I will tear their empire down to the foundation. Every single one of them. That is a vow. I stood up, the chair scraping sharply against the linoleum floor. I took one last, long look at my daughter, memorizing the devastating quiet of her room before turning and walking out the door. The transition from grieving father to tactical hunter was instantaneous. As soon as I stepped out of the hospital, the cold night air hit my face, clearing away the lingering scent of bleach and despair. I walked to my armored SUV, ignoring the curious glances of a few lingering reporters near the entrance. I climbed into the driver's seat and pulled out an encrypted tablet from the hidden compartment under the console. The screen flared to life, displaying a real-time, high-resolution map of the city. Blue dots flickered across the grid, representing the sudden, covert influx of the ghost team I had activated. These weren't corporate security guards or off-duty cops. They were former Black Ops specialists, men and women I had commanded in theaters of war that didn't officially exist. They owed me their lives, and I paid them very well to remain entirely off the grid. A secure text notification popped up on the screen. It was from Felix, my lead intelligence operative. Target package assembled, 40 profiles, complete financial, digital, and physical footprint established. Uploading now. I tapped the screen and the face of Tristan Vance filled the display. His smug, arrogant smile stared back at me from a recent fraternity gala photo. Below his picture was a staggering amount of data, banking records, daily schedules, GPS tracking from his phone, and a list of his 39 accomplices. Felix had bypassed their expensive digital security in less than an hour. I scrolled through the faces. They were all young, wealthy, and entirely oblivious to the fact that they were now being hunted by a ghost. I didn't want them dead immediately. Death was too quick, too merciful. I wanted to dismantle their lives. I wanted them to feel the same terrifying helplessness they had inflicted on Violet. I selected a name near the bottom of the list, Logan. He was a sophomore, a legacy admission whose father owned a massive logistics company. According to Felix's data, Logan wasn't part of the inner circle. He was a follower, a coward who had likely stood by and cheered while the others tore my daughter apart. He was the perfect place to start. I tapped the screen again, sending a coded directive to Felix. Isolate Target 38, Logan. No lethal force yet. Cut his communications and acquire him quietly. I started the engine of the SUV, the deep guttural roar of the custom V8 echoing in the empty parking garage. I slipped the vehicle into gear and merged seamlessly into the late-night city traffic. I wasn't heading to my penthouse or my corporate headquarters. I was heading to an abandoned, subterranean storage facility on the outskirts of the industrial district, a property I had purchased years ago under a shell corporation for exactly this kind of off-the-books operation. It took 45 minutes to reach the facility. The heavy steel roll-up door rattled open at my approach, revealing a cavernous, dimly lit concrete space. I parked the SUV and walked over to a metal table set up near the center of the room. On it sat a heavy, black Pelican case. I unlatched the case, the metallic clicks echoing in the empty room. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, was the tactical gear I hadn't worn in 15 years. The matte black body armor, the specialized communication earpiece, the suppressed sidearm, and the custom-machined combat knife. I ran my hand over the cold metal of the weapons, feeling the familiar, grounding weight of violence. A sudden, sharp ping from my tablet broke the silence. Felix was calling on the secure line. "Commander," Felix said, his voice clipped and professional. "Target 38 is secure. We intercepted him leaving a private club downtown. He was heavily intoxicated and unaccompanied. His security detail was easily misdirected." "Condition?" I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. "Unharmed, but highly agitated," Felix replied. "He is currently restrained in the back of a transport van, heading to your location. ETA is 10 minutes. Bring him in through the loading dock," I instructed. "And Felix, make sure he is wide awake when he gets here." "Copy that," Felix said, and the line went dead. I began to methodically equip the tactical gear, the familiar routine settling my racing pulse. I strapped the heavy armor over my chest, the Kevlar plates cold against my body. I checked the action on the suppressed pistol, the smooth, mechanical slide a reassuring sound in the vast, empty room. I was no longer Victor Sterling, Billionaire CEO. I was the nightmare these boys had arrogantly summoned. 10 minutes later, The heavy metal door at the back of the facility groaned open. Two large men dressed in dark, unmarked tactical gear dragged a struggling, blindfolded figure into the room. It was Logan. He was thrashing wildly, shouting muffled curses through the heavy tape over his mouth. The strong smell of stale alcohol and sudden, overwhelming fear rolled off him in waves. They hauled him to the center of the room and forced him into a heavy metal chair, securing his wrists and ankles with thick zip ties. Felix stepped forward, his face obscured by a dark balaclava, and ripped the blindfold and the tape away in one swift motion. Logan gasped for air, his eyes wide and panicked as they adjusted to the dim light. He looked around the terrifying, cavernous space, his gaze finally landing on me. I stood in the shadows, fully geared, watching him with cold, detached precision. "Who are you?" Logan screamed, his voice cracking with pure terror. "Do you know who my father is? He will destroy you. Let me go right now, or I swear to God." I stepped forward into the pool of harsh overhead light. The arrogance instantly drained from his face, replaced by a sudden, horrifying realization. He recognized me from the news, from the university gala, from the empire I controlled, but he didn't recognize the man standing before him now. "I know exactly who your father is, Logan," I said, my voice low and dangerously calm. "But your father isn't here, and he can't save you." I pulled the heavy combat knife from my vest and slowly walked toward the chair. "We are going to have a very long conversation about a girl named Violet," I whispered, resting the flat, cold blade against his trembling cheek. "And you're going to tell me exactly how to break Tristan Vance." Logan's breathing was ragged, his chest heaving against the thick zip ties binding him to the heavy metal chair. The metallic scent of the abandoned storage facility seemed to close in around him, amplifying his terror. He tried to pull his face away from the flat, freezing edge of my combat knife, but I pressed it just firmly enough to let him feel the perfectly honed steel. "You're Gare Victor Sterling," Logan stammered, his eyes darting frantically around the dimly lit concrete room, looking for an exit that did not exist. "You're the aerospace guy? You can't do this. Do you have any idea how much trouble you're in?" I didn't blink. I slowly traced the dull side of the blade down his jawline. "I'm not in trouble, Logan. You are. My dad." "Your dad?" I interrupted, my voice a quiet, lethal hum. "Is currently asleep in his penthouse, completely unaware that his son was snatched from an alleyway 10 minutes ago. His private security team is chasing a cloned GPS signal on your phone, currently heading toward the Canadian border. No one is coming for you." Logan's bravado collapsed instantly. The realization that his family's wealth was entirely useless down here in the dark hit him like a physical blow. He began to shake violently, tears spilling over his pale cheeks. "I didn't touch her," he sobbed, the words tumbling out in a pathetic, desperate rush. "I swear to God, Mr. Sterling, I was just there. Tristan and the older guys, they were the ones who took her upstairs. I just watched the door. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." The confession was like a physical strike to my chest, but years of Black Ops training kept my face an impenetrable mask of stone. "He just watched the door. He stood by and guarded the monsters while they broke my daughter. He was just as guilty as the ones who laid their hands on her." I stepped back, sheathing the knife with a sharp, metallic click that made Logan flinch. I pulled a rugged, encrypted tablet from my tactical vest and tapped the screen. The harsh, bright light illuminated his tear-streaked face. "You are going to give me everything," I commanded, holding the screen up so he could see the complex network map Felix had generated. "Tristan Vance's secure locations, the offshore accounts the fraternity uses for bribes, the names of the university officials on their payroll, every single piece of leverage you hold on the other 39 men. If I talk, Tristan will kill me," Logan whispered, genuine terror replacing his panic. "You don't know him. He's a psychopath. His family owns people. Tristan is the least of your problems right now," I replied, my tone entirely devoid of empathy. "If you lie to me, or if you hold anything back, I will not kill you. I will dismantle your father's logistics empire piece by piece. I will bankrupt your entire bloodline before the sun comes up, and then I will leave you duct-taped to the front gates of the Delta House with a sign explaining exactly what you did to my daughter. Tristan will handle the rest." Logan stared at me, the absolute, cold certainty in my voice breaking his spirit completely. He slumped against the bindings. Okay, I'll tell you everything. Just please, don't ruin my family." For the next 2 hours, Logan spilled his guts. He gave me security access codes to the fraternity's off-campus safe houses. He detailed the intricate web of blackmail the Delta House used to control professors and local police. He gave me the names of the 5 lower-level pledges who were tasked with cleaning up the physical evidence of Violet's assault. When he was finally empty, exhausted, and weeping silently, I signaled Felix. 2 of my operatives stepped out of the shadows, their faces still hidden behind dark balaclavas. "Sedate him," I ordered. "Drop him off in the lobby of his father's corporate headquarters. Leave a burner phone in his pocket with a countdown timer set for 24 hours. Tell him if he contacts Tristan or the police before it hits 0, the financial ruin begins." As they dragged Logan away, my tablet chimed with a secure incoming transmission. It was Felix. "Commander, the intelligence is verified. We have live feeds on the 5 pledges Logan identified. They are currently celebrating at a private VIP club downtown, completely exposed. No private security. Execute Phase 1, I replied, staring at the empty metal chair. I want them terrified. I want them isolated. Make it look like the ground is swallowing them whole. Over the next 48 hours, the first dominoes began to fall. It was not a chaotic shootout. It was a surgical, psychological dismantling of their privileged reality. I didn't pull a single trigger. I used my immense wealth and my ghost team to erase them. The first was a finance major whose father ran a massive hedge fund. Felix's team intercepted him in the underground parking garage of his luxury apartment building. They didn't leave a drop of blood. They simply disabled his vehicle, blinded the security cameras with focused lasers, and took him. 20 minutes later, his entire trust fund was drained. The money rerouted through a dozen shell corporations and donated anonymously to a domestic violence shelter. The second and third pledges were taken from a high-end restaurant. They went to the restroom and never returned to their table. By morning, devastating, irrefutable evidence of their involvement in an illegal narcotics ring was anonymously emailed to every major news outlet, the university dean, and their respective fathers' board of directors. Their families publicly disowned them before lunchtime to save their own stock prices. The fourth was found wandering a desert highway 3 states over, stripped of his expensive clothes and his dignity, completely broken by whatever Felix's team had whispered to him in the dark. He voluntarily checked himself into a psychiatric facility, refusing to speak to the police. The 5th pledge was the one who had physically dumped Violet in the alley. For him, I made an exception. I didn't let my team handle him. I found him alone in his off-campus townhouse, desperately packing a duffel bag, clearly panicked by the sudden, inexplicable disappearance of his friends. He froze when he saw me standing in his living room, the suppressed pistol in my hand a silent, heavy promise. He didn't scream. He just dropped the bag, his hands shaking violently as he backed away until he hit the wall. "I had to," he choked out, tears streaming down his face. "Tristan made me. I'm sorry. I didn't shoot him. I walked up to him. I pressed the cold barrel of the pistol against his forehead. He closed his eyes, sobbing, waiting for the end. "You are going to call Tristan," I commanded softly. "You are going to tell him the ghosts are coming, and then you are going to leave this country and never return." I lowered the weapon and walked out into the night. 5 were gone. 35 remained. The panic was setting in, and Tristan Vance was about to realize that his money could not buy a shield against a father's wrath. The silent evaporation of the 5 pledges sent a shockwave through the Delta House that no amount of trust fund money could suppress. By the 3rd day, the fraternity was completely locked down. Tristan Vance's father had tripled their private security detail, turning the massive brick mansion into a fortress of paranoia. They had no bodies, no ransom demands, and no suspect the police could touch. All they had was a ghost dismantling their golden world. I sat in the command center of my subterranean storage facility, bathed in the cool blue light of Felix's surveillance monitors. My secure tablet was synced to every digital footprint Tristan left. I was tracking his panicked phone calls to his father's lawyers, watching the sudden, massive withdrawals from offshore accounts. The rats were finally realizing they were trapped on a sinking ship. But Tristan was not a follower like Logan. He was the architect of my daughter's nightmare, and he was getting sloppy. "Commander," Felix said, his voice cutting through the quiet hum of the servers. He pointed to the center monitor. "We have a breach in their protocol. Target 12, a senior named Evan. He just slipped out the back entrance of the Delta House. He bypassed the private security and took a burner car. He's moving fast toward the financial district." I stood up, the heavy Kevlar vest shifting against my chest. Evan was Tristan's right-hand man. If anyone knew the full scope of what happened to Violet, it was him. "Track him," I ordered, grabbing my suppressed sidearm. "Do not engage until I am on site." I took the armored SUV, pushing the heavy engine to its limit through the city's midnight traffic. Felix guided me through my earpiece, tracking Evan's erratic driving pattern. He wasn't heading to a club or a safe house. He was heading toward the gleaming glass and steel skyscraper that housed my own aerospace company's corporate headquarters. "He's pulling into the executive underground garage, Commander," Felix reported, confusion bleeding into his normally stoic voice. "He used a VIP access card to bypass the automated security gates." "How did he get that clearance?" A cold, heavy knot formed in my stomach. Only board members and top-tier executives had that level of access. I bypassed the main entrance entirely, using an old maintenance tunnel I had designed during the building's construction. I moved through the subterranean levels like a shadow, the silence of the concrete corridors broken only by the soft, deliberate tread of my tactical boots. I found Evan standing nervously by the private elevator bank on sub-level 3. He was sweating through his expensive designer suit, clutching a thick manila envelope to his chest. He kept checking his phone, jumping at every mechanical groan of the building. I stepped out from behind a concrete pillar, raising the suppressed pistol. "Don't move," I commanded, my voice echoing off the concrete walls. Evan spun around, dropping his phone. The color drained completely from his face as he stared at the weapon pointed directly at his chest. He recognized me instantly. He raised his hands, the manila envelope shaking violently in his grip. "Mr. Sterling," Evan stammered, backing up until he hit the cold steel doors of the elevator. I can explain. Tristan sent me. I didn't want to come here." I closed the distance between us in 3 long strides, grabbing the front of his jacket and slamming him hard against the elevator doors. The impact knocked the wind out of him, and the envelope slipped from his fingers, spilling its contents onto the floor. "Explain," I whispered, pressing the barrel of the pistol against his rib cage. "Right now. We didn't just pick her randomly." Evan gasped, tears welling in his terrified eyes. Tristan didn't even know who Violet was until 2 weeks ago. He was hired, Mr. Sterling. We were all hired. The world seemed to stop spinning. The air in the garage suddenly felt thin and freezing cold. Hired? To do what? Evan swallowed hard, his eyes darting down to the papers scattered on the ground. "To break her, to get leverage on you. Tristan's dad has connections, but this wasn't about the frat. It was a corporate hit. Someone wanted you out of the way, distracted, destroyed, so they could force a hostile takeover of your company while you were grieving." I looked down at the documents. They were bank transfer records, massive sums of money wired from a shell corporation into Tristan Vance's private offshore account. The dates matched perfectly with the week before Violet was assaulted. "Who?" I demanded, my voice dropping to a terrifying absolute zero. I pressed the gun harder into his ribs. "Give me the name." Evan squeezed his eyes shut, sobbing openly now. "Colin. Your partner, Colin. He arranged the whole thing. He paid Tristan to drug her, to record it, to use it against you. He wanted you to step down as CEO, and he knew Violet was the only way to break you." The revelation hit me with the force of a freight train. Colin, the man I had built this empire with, the man who had stood beside me at my wife's funeral, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder, the man who was currently running my company while I sat in a hospital room, watching my daughter fight for her life. It was not just a horrific random act of violence by 40 entitled thugs. It was a calculated, devastating betrayal from my closest friend. Colin had orchestrated the destruction of my child to steal my company. I released Evan, letting him slide down the elevator doors to the floor, completely broken. I stared at the bank records, the magnitude of the betrayal washing over me, stripping away the last remnants of the civilized billionaire. I keep my earpiece. "Felix, Commander, change of plans," I said, my voice eerily calm, the soldier completely overriding the father. "Target protocol is updated. Tristan Vance is no longer the primary. Lock down all executive travel for Colin, ground his private jet, freeze his corporate assets, and prepare the ghost team for a full breach of his estate." I looked down at Evan, who was curled in a fetal position, weeping softly. "I didn't touch her," Evan whispered, staring blankly at the concrete floor. "I swear I didn't." "You took the money," I replied, turning my back on him, "and you watched her burn. Your debt is not cleared." I walked back into the shadows of the maintenance tunnel, leaving him shivering in the cold. The hunt had just escalated from a father's vengeance to an absolute scorched earth war. Colin thought he was playing a boardroom game. He was about to find out exactly what kind of monster he had invited into his home. The drive from the corporate garage back to my subterranean command center was a blur of neon lights and boiling, toxic rage. The revelation that Colin, the man who had stood as my best man, the godfather to Violet, was the architect of her destruction, shattered the final, fragile barrier between the civilized CEO and the soldier I used to be. Every shared memory, every handshake, every late-night strategy session over expensive scotch was now tainted with the blood of my only child. I burst through the heavy steel doors of the storage facility, the metallic clang echoing loudly enough to make Felix flinch at his monitor station. I stripped the tactical vest off and threw it onto the concrete floor, my chest heaving as I stared at the sprawling digital map of the city. "Commander," Felix began, his voice tight with an urgency I rarely heard from him. "I initiated the asset freeze on Colin's accounts as you ordered, but the system pushed back instantly. He was expecting it." I leaned over the console, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the edge of the metal desk. "Explain." Felix tapped his keyboard, pulling up a secondary screen. 10 minutes after you interrogated Evan, a massive offshore wire transfer cleared from Colin's primary holding company. He didn't just drain the accounts, Victor. He routed $50 million to an encrypted ledger associated with Vanguard Solutions. Vanguard. The name hit me like a physical blow. They weren't a security firm. They were a private military contractor operating out of the shadows. They hired disgraced special forces operatives, men who fought without rules or borders. Colin hadn't just anticipated my realization. He had weaponized my own fortune against me. He had bought an army. "They are already moving," Felix continued, his fingers flying across the keys. "I'm tracking 3 blacked-out SUVs converging on your penthouse right now. They bypassed the building's security protocols completely. They aren't looking to arrest you, Commander. They are an assassination squad. Let them sweep the empty apartment," I said, my voice dropping back to the freezing absolute zero of a combat mindset. "They won't find anything but dust. Colin thinks he can outspin my tactical experience. He thinks Vanguard can hunt me. He is wrong." I turned away from the monitors and walked toward the heavy, reinforced steel locker at the back of the facility. I keyed the biometric lock, the heavy bolts sliding back with a solid, satisfying thud. The armory was no longer a precautionary measure. It was a necessity. I bypassed the standard sidearms and pulled down a customized, suppressed short-barreled rifle, the matte black finish cold and familiar in my hands. I loaded 6 heavy magazines into a new, low-profile tactical rig. My tablet buzzed violently on the desk. A secure video feed popped up on the main monitor. It wasn't Felix's team, it was Colin. He was sitting in his expansive, glass-walled office at the top of my aerospace tower. He looked perfectly composed, sipping from a crystal tumbler, wearing a suit I had bought for him in Milan 3 years ago. His expression was a horrifying mask of feigned sympathy. "Victor," Colin said smoothly, his voice echoing in the empty concrete bunker. "I assume you found Evan. It is a tragedy, really. The boy was sloppy." I stared at the screen, the rifle hanging casually from its tactical sling against my chest. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten him. I simply let him see the void in my eyes. "You broke her, Colin," I whispered, the words carrying more weight than a scream ever could. "You used my daughter to steal a company we built together." Colin sighed, setting the tumbler down on the polished mahogany desk. "It was never personal, Victor. It was strictly business. You were losing your edge. Since your wife passed, you've been soft. The board saw it. I saw it. The aerospace industry requires a wolf at the helm, not a grieving widower obsessed with his daughter's art projects. Tristan Vance and his little fraternity, they were just a tool to force you into an early, quiet retirement." "You sent Vanguard to my home," I stated, ignoring his corporate justification for destroying a human life. "Vanguard is merely an insurance policy," Colin replied, his smile failing to reach his cold eyes. "I know your background, Victor. I know what you did before you put on a suit. But you are one man, you are 50 years old, sitting in the dark, fighting ghosts. I have 40 heavily armed mercenaries sweeping the city for you right now. And if they don't find you..." He paused, leaning closer to the camera, the veneer of civility slipping away. "They will find Violet's hospital room. The private security you hired for her ICU wing won't last 30 seconds against Vanguard. Surrender your shares, sign the transfer documents I just emailed to your lawyer, and walk away. Or I finish what Tristan started." The feed cut to black. The silence in the bunker was absolute, broken only by the steady hum of the servers. Felix slowly turned his chair to look at me, his face pale beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. He knew what Colin had just done. He hadn't just threatened my life. He had put a crosshair on my daughter's hospital bed. "Commander," Felix said quietly, "Vanguard is moving a secondary team toward the medical district. We have maybe 20 minutes before they breach the ICU." I didn't answer immediately. I walked back to the armory and grabbed 2 fragmentation grenades, clipping them to my vest. I pulled a specialized, encrypted comms unit from the charging dock and fitted it into my ear. Colin thought he had cornered me. He thought he had forced me to choose between my company and my child. He fundamentally misunderstood the man he had betrayed. I wasn't going to choose. I was going to burn his entire world to the ground. "Felix," I commanded, my voice devoid of anything human. "Reroute the ghost team to the hospital. Establish a hard perimeter around Violet's room. No one gets on that floor who doesn't bleed when you shoot them. Authorize lethal force for all Vanguard operatives." "And you, Victor?" Felix asked, his fingers already flying across the keyboard to redeploy the team. "Where are you going?" I turned toward the heavy steel doors leading to the subterranean garage. I racked the charging handle of the rifle, the sharp, metallic snap cutting through the bunker. "I am going to Colin's estate," I replied. "I am going to show Vanguard what a real ghost looks like." The drive to Colin's sprawling, gated estate on the cliffs overlooking the ocean took exactly 32 minutes. I didn't take the armored SUV. It was too conspicuous, a massive, roaring target for Vanguard's tactical sweeps. Instead, I took a matte black electric motorcycle I had kept in the subterranean bunker for reconnaissance. It was completely silent, a ghost slipping through the heavy fog rolling off the water. The cold ocean air whipped against my tactical gear, biting through the fabric, but I barely felt it. My mind was entirely consumed by the tactical geometry of the approaching Violets. I was tracking the encrypted comms of Felix's ghost team defending Violet's hospital room, listening to the terse, professional check-ins that confirmed the perimeter was holding. As I neared the final, winding coastal road leading to Colin's property, a pair of headlights suddenly flared behind me, cutting through the thick fog. It wasn't Vanguard. It was a single, unmarked police cruiser, its siren silent, but its light bar flashing a muted, aggressive red and blue. The driver was accelerating hard, matching my erratic, high-speed maneuvers. I cursed under my breath, my hand instinctively dropping to the suppressed sidearm holstered on my thigh. I couldn't afford a shootout with local law enforcement, not with Violet's life hanging by a thread and Vanguard closing in on the hospital. I downshifted, bringing the silent motorcycle to a controlled stop on the gravel shoulder, mere yards from the towering, wrought iron gates of Colin's estate. The cruiser skidded to a halt behind me, the heavy doors flying open. Detective Adrian stepped out into the swirling fog, his service weapon drawn, but pointed down at the wet asphalt. He looked exhausted, the deep lines around his eyes completely devoid of the cynical detachment he had worn in the hospital. "Hands off the handlebars, Victor," Adrian commanded, his voice tight and ragged over the sound of the crashing waves below. Slowly, I complied, stepping off the bike and raising my hands to shoulder height. I didn't reach for my weapons. I didn't break eye contact. "You are way outside your jurisdiction, Adrian," I said, my voice eerily calm, contrasting the heavy, tactical gear strapped to my chest. "And you are standing between me and the man who orchestrated the destruction of my daughter. Walk away." Adrian shook his head, taking a slow step forward. "I can't do that, Victor. I found the 5 pledges, or what was left of their lives. You completely dismantled them. You bankrupted their families, destroyed their reputations, and vanished them off the map. You didn't just break the law, you erased it." "The law failed Violet," I countered, the absolute certainty in my voice hanging heavy in the damp air. The district attorney walked away. "The dean tried to buy me off. You told me the system was rigged, Adrian. You told me their money made them untouchable, so I changed the game, and now you are standing outside the estate of a billionaire with enough firepower to level a city block." Adrian shot back, his grip tightening on his weapon. "Do you have any idea what is waiting for you behind those gates? Colin's private security detail is gone. He replaced them with Vanguard mercenaries. I ran the plates on the SUVs sweeping the medical district. They are private military, Victor. They will slaughter you. They are already trying to slaughter my daughter," I replied, taking a deliberate step toward the detective. "Colin sent a kill squad to the ICU 20 minutes ago to force me to surrender my company. My team is currently holding the line at the hospital. If you arrest me right now, Adrian, you are signing Violet's death warrant. You are letting the architect of her nightmare win. Adrian stopped, the sheer magnitude of the corruption hitting him like a physical blow. He slowly lowered his weapon, the seasoned cop suddenly realizing the true scale of the war he had stumbled into. Colin ordered a hit on a hospital, Adrian whispered, his voice cracking with genuine horror. He went after the girl again. He doesn't care about Violet, I said, the cold, sociopathic reality of corporate greed bleeding into my tone. She was just leverage. Tristan Vance and his fraternity of monsters were just tools he bought to break me, to steal my empire. Adrian stood in the fog, the flashing lights of his cruiser reflecting off the wet asphalt. He was a good cop trapped in a broken, polluted system. He had joined the force to protect people like Violet, only to spend his career protecting the sons of billionaires from the consequences of their cruelty. He looked at my tactical gear, the suppressed rifle slung across my chest, the fragmentation grenades clipped to my belt. He knew exactly what I was about to do to Colin, and for the first time in his life, he didn't see a criminal, he saw justice. My radio is acting up, Adrian said suddenly, his voice thick with a quiet, terrifying resolve. He holstered his weapon and reached into his cruiser, turning off the flashing light bar. The heavy coastal fog immediately swallowed the vehicle in darkness. I lost your trail 10 miles back, Adrian continued, never taking his eyes off me. I am going to respond to a disturbance call at the hospital. If there are heavily armed mercenaries threatening a civilian ward, I am going to need to mobilize SWAT. It will take them exactly 30 minutes to secure the perimeter. He walked back to the driver's side door, pausing with his hand on the handle. You have 30 minutes, Victor, Adrian said softly, the weight of his own moral compromise settling over his shoulders. Do not leave a mess I can't sweep under the rug. And for God's sake, make him pay for what he did to her. He got into the cruiser, slammed the door, and tore off into the fog, heading back toward the city. The legal trap had closed, not on me, but on the very system that had failed my child. I turned back toward the massive wrought iron gates of Colin's estate. The imposing stone walls were lined with advanced security cameras and motion sensors, guarded by vanguard mercenaries who fought for a paycheck, not a cause. I tapped the encrypted comms unit in my ear. Felix, I whispered, the soldier fully taking command. The police are blind, the hospital is secure. Kill the power to Colin's estate, it is time to go to work. The towering wrought iron gates of Colin's estate loomed out of the thick coastal fog like the entrance to a mausoleum. I crouched in the damp brush near the tree line, my suppressed rifle resting comfortably against my shoulder. Through my night vision optics, the sprawling modern mansion was a fortress of glowing security lights and thermal signatures. 4 vanguard mercenaries patrolled the perimeter, their movements disciplined and precise. They were not frat boys, they were killers. Felix, I murmured into my comms, the sound barely carrying over the crashing ocean waves below the cliffs. Status? The hospital perimeter is holding, Commander. Felix's voice came back, cool and professional. Vanguard attempted a breach on the ICU floor 3 minutes ago. The Ghost team repelled them. No casualties on our side. Violet is safe, but Colin's forces are regrouping. Good, I said, my finger resting lightly above the trigger guard. Execute blackout on the estate, now. Instantly, the entire property plunged into absolute darkness. The floodlights died, the motion sensors went blind. A beat later, the dull, heavy thrum of the mansion's backup generators kicked in, but the critical 10-second delay was all the opening I needed. I moved. I didn't run. I flowed through the fog like water, crossing the open ground with the silent, predatory grace of a man who had spent a decade surviving in hostile territory. The first Vanguard sentry was fumbling with his own night vision goggles when I reached him. I didn't fire. A gunshot, even suppressed, would alert the others. I drove the heavy stock of my rifle into his temple, catching his dead weight before he hit the gravel driveway, and lowered him silently to the ground. One down, dozens more inside. I bypassed the main entrance, moving instead toward the massive glass walls of Colin's private study facing the ocean. I knew the layout of this house intimately. I had helped him pick the architect. Every corner, every blind spot, every security vulnerability was burned into my memory. I scaled the decorative stone latticework on the side patio, pulling myself up to the second-floor balcony. Through the glass doors, I could see the glow of emergency lighting illuminating the study. Colin was pacing frantically behind his massive oak desk, shouting into a satellite phone. Tristan Vance, the arrogant ringleader who had broken my daughter, was sitting on a leather sofa, clutching a tumbler of scotch, his face pale and sweating. They had retreated to the safest place they knew, They had locked themselves in a cage with the monster. I placed a small, specialized shaped charge against the reinforced glass of the balcony door, tapped the detonator, and stepped back. The glass didn't shatter. It pulverized instantly into a million harmless, granular pieces with a sharp, concussive pop. I stepped through the empty frame before the dust even settled, bringing the rifle up. Tristan screamed, dropping his glass. It shattered on the hardwood floor, the amber liquid pooling around his expensive loafers. He scrambled backward over the sofa, his false bravado completely evaporated in the face of the violence he had arrogantly invoked. Colin dropped the satellite phone, freezing in place. He stared at me, his eyes wide, recognizing the tactical gear and the absolute, terrifying stillness in my posture. "Victor," Colin gasped, raising his hand slowly. "How? The security? Your money bought mercenaries," I interrupted, my voice devoid of emotion. "It didn't buy soldiers." I fired a single, suppressed round into the floor, an inch from Tristan's foot. The sharp crack made the boy sob violently, curling into a pathetic ball behind the furniture. "Get up, Tristan," I commanded, shifting my aim toward him, "or I will end you exactly where you lie." He crawled out slowly, shaking uncontrollably, his hands raised in surrender. The monster who had laughed on Violet's phone, who had believed his father's wealth made him a god, was nothing more than a terrified, broken child. "Please," Tristan begged, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry. Colin made me do it. He said he would ruin my family if I didn't help him get the blackmail material. He gave me the drugs. He gave me the access codes to Violet's dorm." Colin's face twisted in rage. "Shut up, you idiot. He's going to kill us anyway." "Access codes," I repeated, the words chilling my blood despite the adrenaline pumping through my veins. I kept the rifle level at Colin's chest, but my mind was suddenly racing. The dorms were heavily secured. Violet was cautious. She never let strangers in. "How did you get the access codes to her private residence, Colin?" Colin hesitated, his eyes darting toward the heavy mahogany doors leading to the hallway. A sickening, smug smile slowly crept onto his face, the realization dawning on him that he still held one final, devastating card. "She didn't tell you?" Colin asked, his voice dripping with venomous amusement. "Oh, Victor, you really don't know anything about your own daughter's life, do you?" The heavy mahogany doors suddenly swung open. Two Vanguard mercenaries stepped into the room, their weapons raised. But they weren't alone. They were dragging someone with them. It was Brooke, Violet's college roommate, the quiet, studious girl who had spent Thanksgiving at our house, the girl Violet called her best friend. Brooke was terrified, her face stained with tears, trembling violently as the mercenaries shoved her to the floor between Colin and me. She wouldn't look at me, she just stared at the broken glass on the floor, weeping uncontrollably. "Brooke," I whispered, the confusion momentarily overriding my tactical focus. Colin laughed, a dry, hollow sound that echoed in the cavernous study. "Tell him, Brooke. Tell the great Victor Sterling how a little bit of student debt and a promise of a six-figure job at my company was all it took." Brooke sobbed louder, curling her knees to her chest. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling. I'm so sorry. I needed the money. I just let them in. I put the powder in her tea before I left for the library. I didn't know there were 40 of them. I thought it was just Tristan. I thought they were just going to take some embarrassing pictures." The air in the room completely vanished. The betrayal was absolute, tearing through the final shreds of my humanity. My daughter hadn't just been hunted by strangers. She had been sold by her closest friend. She had been handed over to the monsters by the one person she trusted to protect her in that dorm room. I looked at Colin, who was still smiling, reveling in the utter destruction of my world. "You see, Victor," Colin taunted, stepping out from behind his desk. "You can kill me. You can kill Tristan, but you can't kill the reality of what happened. Violet's entire life was a lie. Her friends, her security, your company, it was all mine to break." I slowly lowered the rifle, the barrel pointing at the floor. The soldier within me didn't rage, the father didn't scream. The absolute, freezing clarity of total warfare settled over my soul. "You're right, Colin," I said softly, reaching for the fragmentation grenade clipped to my vest. "I can't kill reality, but I can erase it." Colin's smug smile vanished the instant my thumb hooked the pull ring of the fragmentation grenade. The two Vanguard mercenaries flanking Brooke immediately recognized the lethal, mechanical click. They didn't shout commands. They didn't try to negotiate. They raised their rifles, the red laser sights painting my chest in the dim emergency lighting. But I was already moving. I didn't throw the grenade at them. I pitched it hard against the massive vaulted ceiling of the study, directly into the heavy, imported crystal chandelier hanging above Colin's desk. As the small, heavy sphere arced upward, I lunged violently to my left, diving behind a thick marble column just as the mercenaries opened fire. The deafening roar of automatic gunfire chewed through the drywall where I had stood a fraction of a second before, and then the world exploded. The concussion of the grenade detonating in an enclosed space was absolute. It wasn't the fiery bloom of a movie explosion, it was a brutal physical shockwave that blew out the remaining glass in the study and instantly pulverized the chandelier. A deadly storm of razor-sharp crystal shards rained down on the room. Colin screamed, throwing his arms over his head as he was pelted by the falling glass. Tristan scrambled backward like a crab, sobbing uncontrollably, completely useless in the chaos. I rolled out from behind the marble column before the dust even began to settle, my suppressed rifle snapping up. The two Vanguard mercenaries were disoriented, their ears bleeding from the overpressure. They never had a chance to reacquire their targets. Two quick, controlled bursts dropped them instantly to the hardwood floor. The silence that followed the gunfire was suffocating, broken only by the ringing in my ears and Tristan's pathetic whimpering. I stood up slowly, the dust settling on my tactical gear like ash. The study was a war zone. Colin was on his knees behind his desk, clutching a bleeding gash on his forehead. Brooke was curled into a tight ball near the doorway, screaming silently, her hands covering her ears. "Felix!" I commanded into my comms, my voice completely devoid of adrenaline. "Commander!" Felix's voice cracked through the static. The explosion triggered a massive response from the rest of the Vanguard detail on the estate. "You have heavily armed hostiles converging on your position from all lower levels. Hold the perimeter at the hospital," I ordered, stepping over the bodies of the mercenaries. "I am finishing this." I walked toward Colin. He looked up at me, the blood dripping into his eyes, the absolute terror finally breaking through his arrogant facade. He realized then that I wasn't just a grieving father looking for an apology, I was the end of his world. "Victor, please," Colin choked out, backing away until his spine hit the wall. "I'll sign the company back to you, I'll give you everything, just let me live." I reached him, grabbing him by the throat and hauling him to his feet. I slammed him hard against the wall, the impact rattling his teeth. "You don't have anything I want, Colin. You broke the only thing that mattered." I threw him to the floor next to Tristan, who was still paralyzed by fear. I turned to Brooke. She was shivering violently, her eyes wide with horrified realization of the monster she had unleashed by selling out her best friend. "Get up," I commanded, my voice cold and hard. Brooke scrambled to her feet, tears streaming down her face. "Mr. Sterling, I swear to God I didn't know what they were going to do to her. They just told me to put the powder in her tea." "You watched her drink it," I whispered, the words carrying the full weight of my daughter's suffering. "You watched her fall asleep, and then you unlocked the door for 40 men. You are a coward, Brooke, and you're going to live with that for the rest of your life." I grabbed her arm and shoved her toward the shattered balcony doors. "Run, get as far away from this house as you can before Vanguard kills you just for being in the room." She didn't hesitate. She scrambled over the broken glass and disappeared into the fog, sobbing hysterically. She would never find peace. She would wake up screaming every night, remembering the moment she traded a human soul for a corporate paycheck. That was her justice. Now, I had to deal with the architects of the nightmare. I heard the heavy, rhythmic thud of Vanguard boots charging up the main staircase. They were moving in force, sweeping the hallways with tactical precision. Colin heard them too. A desperate, fleeting spark of hope ignited in his eyes. "They're coming, Victor," Colin sneered, spitting blood onto the floor. "You're trapped up here. You can't fight a whole army." I didn't answer him. I reached into my tactical vest and pulled out a small, heavy black cylinder. It wasn't a grenade. It was a localized, high-yield thermite charge. I clamped it directly onto the heavy steel frame of Colin's personal safe, hidden behind a painting on the far wall. The safe held his offshore ledgers, his blackmail files, and the physical deeds to his empire. I keyed the detonator. The thermite burned with a blinding, terrible intensity of a dying star, melting through the reinforced steel like butter, instantly incinerating millions of dollars of corrupt leverage into absolute ash. Colin screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony as he watched his entire life's work burn to nothing in seconds. "No, my files, my money." "You don't need money where you are going," I said softly. The heavy mahogany doors to the study burst open. 6 Vanguard mercenaries flooded the room, their weapons raised. I didn't try to shoot them all. I dropped my rifle, letting it hang from the sling, and hit the release catch on my tactical vest, letting the heavy ceramic plates fall to the floor with a loud clatter. I raised my hands slowly. The mercenaries froze, confused by the sudden surrender. Colin laughed, a manic, broken sound. "Kill him! Shoot him right now!" But they didn't. The lead mercenary slowly lowered his weapon, his earpiece buzzing with an incoming transmission. He looked at me, then looked at the 2 dead mercenaries on the floor, and finally at Colin. "Stand down," the mercenary commanded his men. He turned to Colin, his face completely devoid of loyalty. "Mr. Sterling just wired $50 million to our offshore account from his private servers. He bought our contract. We don't work for you anymore, Colin." The absolute silence that followed was heavier than the explosion. Colin's eyes went wide, the final realization of his defeat crushing him completely. He had tried to buy an army to kill me, but he forgot that I had built the fortune he was trying to steal. I lowered my hands, the terrifying calm returning to my posture. I looked at the lead mercenary. "Leave," I ordered softly. "Take your men and vanish. If I ever see any of you again, I won't be paying you." They didn't argue. They turned and walked out of the study, the sound of their boots echoing down the stairs, leaving Colin and Tristan alone with the ghost they had summoned. I picked up my suppressed sidearm from the floor. "Tristan," I said, my voice barely a whisper in the ruined room. "You have 30 seconds to tell me exactly what you whispered to my daughter before you broke her, or I will start shooting pieces off you until you do." The rain began to fall in heavy, slanting sheets outside the shattered balcony doors, washing away the fog and dampening the lingering smell of cordite and pulverized drywall. The study was a ruined monument to Colin's greed. Tristan Vance was sobbing uncontrollably on the floor, his hands clutching his knees, his arrogant facade completely destroyed by the violence he had summoned. Colin sat slumped against his massive, ruined oak desk, the thermite fire casting dancing, demonic shadows across his bleeding face. He had nothing left. I had burned his leverage, bought his army, and stripped every defense his money could provide. I stood over Tristan, the heavy, suppressed sidearm resting casually in my grip. I didn't point it at him. The sheer, overwhelming presence of a father who had systematically dismantled 40 lives in 3 days was enough. "Tell me, Tristan," I whispered, my voice a terrifying calm in the storm. "What did you say to her?" Tristan squeezed his eyes shut, his body shaking so violently I thought he might go into shock. "I didn't want to hurt her," he screamed, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. "Colin said she wouldn't remember. He said it was just for leverage. When she woke up, when she started fighting back, I told her no one would ever believe her. I told her my dad owned the police. I told her she was nothing." The words hit me like physical blows, reopening the agonizing wound in my chest. I told her she was nothing. He had used his immense, inherited privilege to shatter my daughter's reality before he even laid a hand on her. I looked down at the pathetic boy. The soldier in me wanted to put a bullet between his eyes. The father inside me wanted him to feel even a small piece of the fear Violet had lived through in that dorm room, but I remembered the promise I made standing beside her hospital bed. I refused to turn into the same monster they were. My goal was justice, not revenge for its own sake. "You're correct, Tristan," I said calmly, clicking my weapon back into its holster. "Your father may control the police, but he has no power over the FBI, and definitely none over the IRS. I took out my encrypted tablet and dropped it on the floor between them. The screen was still processing an active data transfer. For the past 2 days, while you were both hiding inside this mansion, my team wasn't only tracking down your fraternity brothers, I told them, my words bouncing off the broken walls. We were quietly tearing apart your father's entire empire. Every hidden account, every bribery record, every piece of blackmail evidence Colin was sitting on, it's already in the hands of federal investigators. Local police might overlook an assault case, but the federal government will never overlook a trillion-dollar case of tax fraud and organized crime. Colin's head jerked upward, his eyes filled with pure hopelessness. He tried to grab the tablet, smearing blood across the screen, but it wouldn't unlock. The information was already gone, out of his reach. "You're finished, Victor," Colin hissed, his voice breaking apart. "Once people find out what happened here tonight, they won't find a single thing," I cut him off calmly. "I just transferred $50 million to Vanguard. Do you understand what that kind of money buys, Colin? It buys silence. It buys a full cleanup crew. By morning, this entire house will be untouched. No bodies, no bullet marks, nothing. And when federal agents storm your doors tomorrow, you won't have a single cent left to hire a defense lawyer. I turned and walked away from them. They were finished now, trapped forever in a disaster they had created for themselves. Tristan would spend the rest of his existence behind federal bars, his father's name buried in disgrace. Colin would waste away in a cell, forced to live with the knowledge that he lost his entire empire. I had honored my word. Every one of the 40 men who hurt my daughter had their lives dismantled completely, without me spilling a single drop of innocent blood. I made my way down the grand staircase and left them standing in the darkness. 6 months passed, and the city had transformed completely. The Vance real estate empire crumbled under federal charges. Colin's companies were confiscated. The university dean was pushed into early retirement, his reputation destroyed. I was sitting peacefully in the sunlit conservatory of our new countryside home, far from the city that had almost consumed us. I wasn't dressed in a suit anymore, and tactical gear was long behind me. I was simply a father, holding a warm cup of coffee. Across the room, seated at her easel under soft morning light, was Violet. She had picked up painting again. Her physical wounds had faded into thin lines she would trace with her fingers whenever lost in thought. Her emotional wounds, though, still needed time to heal. Some nights she still woke up screaming, frightened by shadows in her own room. Some days leaving the house felt impossible. But she kept fighting. Piece by piece, she was rediscovering her light. She stopped painting for a moment, brush suspended mid-air, and glanced over at me. For the first time in 6 months, a real, gentle smile appeared on her face. "It's turning out beautiful, sweetheart," I said softly. "It's getting there," she answered, her voice soft but firm. I think the colors are finally returning." I smiled back at her, feeling the crushing weight that had sat on my chest for months finally lift away. The billionaires had tried to shatter her, never realizing they were up against a girl forged from the very same fire as her father. We had made it through the darkness, and now, together, we were going to guard the light.